Hello and welcome to the Scotland 2050 Hustings in association with the Scotsman. I'm Alistair Grant, the political editor of the Scotsman, and you'll see tonight we've got representatives from all 6 of Holyrood's political parties, all of them keen to get your vote. But before I introduce them, just a quick word about tonight's event. Scotland 2050 is primarily a one-day conference that aims to bring together people from the world of business, politics, civic society, as well as providing a platform for the people of Scotland to shape the future of their country. The next one-day conference will be taking place on June 2nd here at the Assembly Rooms. Tickets are free, like this Hustings, but if you could please go to the Scotland 2050 website to secure a place. And I have to say as well, there's no fire alarms planned tonight, so if one goes off, please do make your way out of the building, but hopefully that won't happen. But on to tonight's event. On the stage this evening, we've got Mary McCallan, who is the SNP's Housing Secretary, widely seen as one of her party's most promising talents, indeed often spoken of as a potential future First Minister. We've got Malcolm Offord, the leader of Reform UK in Scotland since January. Polls show his party on course for a spectacular breakthrough in May, undoubtedly one of the most interesting stories of this election. We've got Martin Whitfield, Scottish Labour's business manager in Holyrood. He was a committee convener in the last Parliament, also a former MP. We've got Murdo Fraser, Scottish Conservative MSP since 2001, a bit of a political veteran, one of Holyrood's most experienced parliamentarians. We've got Alex Cole-Hamilton, the leader of the Scottish Liberal Democrats since 2021, who also holds the distinction of receiving the highest number of votes ever cast for a single candidate at a Holyrood election. And we've also got Patrick Harvey, former co-leader of the Scottish Greens, who made history in 2021 when he helped lead his party into government for the first time as part of a power-sharing relationship with the SNP. And the format for tonight is I'm going to ask the candidates some questions centred around the big, broad themes of this election, things like the economy, health, education. We've also had loads of online questions submitted, which I'm going to try and reflect in that. But I also want to leave plenty of time for people in the room to ask questions about whatever they want. So if that means jettisoning some of my own questions, I will do that. There will be a roving mic for that part of the evening, so if you can just stick up your hand, please wait for it to come to you. Introduce yourself if you're comfortable doing that. And also please say if your question is aimed at a particular candidate. But on to the evening, and if I could just ask 2 things of the candidates, please keep your answers short and snappy. A couple of minutes max, ideally. We've got so much to get through. And please also address the question and don't just repeat party talking points. I know you won't do that, just to say from the outset. But I was going to start with allowing each candidate to do their sort of doorstep pitch, what they say to voters when they're out knocking on doors and they've maybe got a minute or so before someone slams the door in your face. Starting with you, Mary.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. It's lovely to join you tonight. I just want to say thank you to Scotland 2050 and the Scotsman for pulling this together. And I was particularly looking forward to tonight because, as well as other hustings which allow us to get into the detail, I think this encourages us to kind of lift our eyes and think about the kind of nation that we want to be. And I think what I can probably do by way of opening remarks, since we will get into policy, is just try to, in this world of information overload, set out to you who we are, what we believe in, and what we're trying to do for Scotland. And the SNP are squarely in the centre-left of Scottish politics. We are social democrats. We believe, on the one hand, that government has a job to create the strongest, most dynamic and inclusive economy that we can, whilst at the same time having a responsibility to build a fair and just society. And we've done that. If I can just pull one example, we're the party that's delivered Social Security Scotland, built on fairness, dignity and respect, and the Scottish National Investment Bank, bringing jobs and investment to our economy. It's why we've used progressive approaches to taxation to fund policies that we all benefit from, like free tuition, prescriptions, eye tests, and more. We believe in using Scotland's energy wealth to benefit our people. We believe in becoming an independent country and having all the powers to determine our own future. We believe in rejoining the European Union. I think it's a catastrophe that we have left, both socially and economically. And we believe in forming a positive role in the world, standing up for human rights, the rule of law, and standing against genocide when we see it. So I would ask for your support in the election. 1, because we stand up for Scotland whilst we're in the UK. 2, because we offer the opportunity, a hopeful opportunity of change through independence and rejoining the European Union. And 3, because only by voting for the SNP do we lock out the politics of division and destruction with reform.
Malcolm?
Thank you. Good to be here at the Assembly Rooms. Reform UK is a centre-right party. So we're on the other side of that schedule, ledger, as it were, from the SNP. And we believe that the way to get solutions for our society is not just always spending other people's money, but actually unleashing the people who live in these communities to solve their own problems. Scotland 2050 should be the most successful part of the UK. We should have a thriving economy where our young people have pathways from school into college education, into apprenticeships, into good jobs, and where our adults are encouraged and retrained through their lifetime to get good jobs, thereby creating prosperity for themselves and for their families. The best form of welfare I can give anybody is a good job. And so Scotland 2050 needs to be a working economy where people work. It's in our DNA as Scots. Now, we have all the natural resources in the UK to be the best part of the UK, if not the best country in the world. Whether these are geographical resources, whether financial resources, or indeed our people. And in fact, actually, we need to remodel our economy now to make a modern economy, a new economy, for the next 25 years. We have, luckily, about 10 sectors. We are just world-class and genuinely world-class. Obviously, we've got financial services. We have got advanced manufacturing. We have energy. We have food and drink. We have tourism and hospitality. We have creative industries. We have life sciences. We have agri, fisheries, and marine. All those industries cover the whole of Scotland. Remember, we have 8% of the population, but 33% of the geography. We can create a modern Scotland where all these sectors are world-class and are populated around the whole of the UK. You do not need to be in big cities to access these jobs. You can do this where you live and where you work. And so what do we need to do to deliver that? We need to unleash the potential of the people of Scotland. You're overtaxed and you're overregulated. We need to make a lower tax economy because people who are taxed lower, more productive, will then create more wealth, which in turn creates more money for public services. So that is an immediate aim. We will come in immediately with a tax cut to realign the 6 bands in Scotland with the 3 in England and then cut it to 1p below. We're more ambitious. We want to be able to compete with England and have a better, stronger economy to fulfill this dream of making Scotland the best country in the UK. And the last piece is you can't grow your economy with expensive energy. So we need to get our energy costs down under control. And if we get our economy working, we can then backfill and provide all the public services that we all value, like the NHS, like education, like roads, like transport. But Scotland in 2050 needs to be a dynamic economy with full employment, with the young people with a pathway to prosperity. That is what the future looks like. Thank you.
Patrick, and remember, doorstep pitch.
Thanks very much. Like others, thanks for the invitation to take part. When Greens speak to folk on the doorstep, we try to make the connection between the huge long-term challenges that the country faces and the actions that are going to improve people's lives in the here and now. If Scotland is going to be a net zero economy before 2050, as the law requires us to be, it needs action right now to do things like cutting home heating, breaking our dependence on volatile prices for fossil fuels. It means cheap public transport, and for a great many people, bus travel has become free thanks to the work that the Greens have taken forward. We want to go further than that and do what other parts of Europe are already doing: highly affordable, cheap, reliable, and to many people free public transport as the critical way to enable people to get about sustainably. But there's a huge amount more that we need to do to make sure that that transition to a sustainable economy is fair and just. Right now, in Scotland, about 2% of the population own as much wealth as half of the rest of us. That kind of chronic inequality will always lead to more child poverty, to more pensioner poverty, to more fuel poverty and insecurity, and people living precarious lives. So we do need to go further on taxation. You'll hear tonight from political parties that will promise you huge spending commitments and tax cuts for the wealthy, and it just doesn't add up. Those who are making those tax cut promises will be stripping billions out of our public services and pushing already poor people further into poverty. Greens will never do that. We'll tell you the truth and say that if we want to invest in the better future that Scotland is capable of and that Scotland deserves, we need to raise the revenue from those with the broadest shoulders.
Martin?
Thank you, and thank you to both the Scotsman and to Scotland 2050 for the opportunity tonight, and also thank you to all of you who've opened the door for this 3-minute pitch. I think to start with, it is right to understand that Scottish Labour are here for Scotland, and after 20 years, we genuinely believe Scotland is ready for change. So what is this election about? This election is about fixing our NHS, because we all know people who are on waiting lists. We all know people who can't fully return to work, can't return to work because they're waiting for treatment. It's about making everybody's life more affordable and to create proper, well-paid jobs that are needed by the people of Scotland here in Scotland. For example, delivering 9,000 apprenticeships. In East Lothian, where I live and I'm campaigning, I have Torness Nuclear Power Station, where I have apprentices who are worried about being forced to move south in 2030 under the present regime because the licensing will say that Torness has to shut down. We need the opportunity for our young people in school to have journeys that don't just head to university, but head to well-paid jobs so they can buy houses, have families, and stay in the communities that raised them. We want to put police back on the streets by giving each ward a named police officer so that shopkeepers know who to contact when there's problems. We're going to build 125,000 new homes because what sits at the bottom of the pyramid of need amongst food and other things is shelter. And we need proper, adequate housing for the people here in Scotland. And we're going to create £350 million pothole fund. Why? Because the thing that comes out at the door most for me is complaints about the state of our roads. The fact people just can't get to work, they can't get to school. In some cases, they can barely leave the street without needing a 4x4, and they don't want that. It is about giving visible change to people as soon as possible. And it's not about promises that can't be delivered. It's about promises that can be achievable and promises that people can see quickly. So this election is a time for choice. We can back out of the cul-de-sac that we're in at the moment and start to brighten that light of a better tomorrow for our young people, for our working communities, and also at the other end of our demographic, those people who have served Scotland and their families all of their lives, so they've got a safe and secure future.
Murdo.
Thank you, Alistair, and thanks to Scotland 2050 and the Scotsman for the invite. I should declare an interest. I'm a columnist on the Scotsman. You can read me every Wednesday. So, I'm not expecting any special treatment, Alistair, tonight. Just bear that in mind. Tonight, after 19 years of SNP rule, I think Scotland needs a fresh start. And if you look at what's been happening in Scotland, I think few people could argue things have got better over the past 2 decades. Our economy has underperformed the rest of the UK. The NHS waiting times and waiting lists are longer. We have the worst drug deaths in Europe. We have a housing crisis. We have school standards that have gone backwards, not improved. We have infrastructure that is crumbling. The A9 dualling is 10 years behind schedule, and the ferries serving our Western Isles communities are simply not up to purpose. We have fewer police than we had when the SNP came to power, and we're all paying the highest taxes in the United Kingdom as a result. So what would we do differently? We would unapologetically put growth first, because if we get more growth in the economy, we create more jobs, more secure, well-paid employment, more apprenticeships, and more tax revenues to pay for the things we all want to see. How do we get better growth? We look at the tax burden on business, the business rates currently hitting, in particular, sectors like hospitality, which are seeing one closure a week at the moment across Scotland. We tackle personal taxation, because the tax differential between Scotland and the rest of the UK is hitting the ability of businesses to recruit talent and hitting business growth. And we tackle energy costs. And one of the ways we would do that is by ensuring security of supply. It makes no sense, given what's happening in the world at the moment, to be closing down the North Sea prematurely. We should be maximising our oil and gas potential in the North Sea to reduce the reliance on imports and give us more tax revenues we can then spend to reducing energy costs for households and for businesses. The Scottish Fiscal Commission, who are independent, say that there's a £1 billion tax gap in Scotland. If only the Scottish economy could perform at the average of the UK economy, just the average, we'd have an extra £1 billion a year to spend on public services. So if we tackle growth, we can get the extra money we need to pay for the things we want. And the final thing I'll say is just this. John Swinney said if the SNP get a majority in the election, he'll use that as a mandate for another independence referendum. I think that's the last thing Scotland needs at the present time. All the distraction of another vote on independence, when what we should be doing is focusing on what really matters. So wherever you are in Scotland, you can vote for Conservative candidates and you can use your peach list vote as a smart way to stop an SNP majority. Thank you.
Last but certainly not least, Alex.
Thank you very much, Alistair, and good evening, everybody. It's great to be here. Scotland has got so much going for it, but right now it just feels like not much is working. People are tired and frustrated. They've been let down by the parties of government. We think Scotland deserves better than that, but it needs to be a vision of change with fairness at its heart. And that's why the Liberal Democrats are approaching this election with a prospectus that will allow you to see a GP at the first time of asking, fixing social care, and by so doing, fixing the abject crisis in our health service, lifting up Scottish education back to its best, by taking mobile phones out of classrooms and putting pupil support assistance into them, driving down the cost of living by insulating cold Scottish homes and using the benefits of our abundant renewable power generation technology to heat those homes. And we want to get Scotland moving again, fixing our roads and fixing our ferries. That's why I called for Parliament to be recalled. We're still in recess. The Parliament hasn't been dissolved yet to fix the crisis in our intra-island ferries. And we can win. For the first time in a long time, we're poised to beat the SNP in 10 constituencies across Scotland, but wherever you are, vote for the Lib Dems on that second peach-coloured ballot. We'll deliver that vision for change with fairness at its heart. But none of this is possible in the current economic fundamentals as we find them. Scotland has a structural deficit of around 12%, and whoever is going to form the next government is going to face really tough choices unless we grow our economy. Now, fundamentally, if you were to sum up the economic drag on Scotland's economic outlook in 3 words, they would be these: planning, skills, and housing. We need to reform planning so it's easier to do business here and to invest here. We need a skills pipeline so the industries of the future can feed that income inward investment. And housing, we need places for them to live. And particularly, we want to reserve key worker housing for communities around Scotland to decide who they need most and to reserve that housing for them. I'll finish by saying this. People ask me what a Liberal Democrat is. Well, the unlikely endorsement of Kemi Badenoch comes in here. And she was told, you think of a Liberal Democrat, it's somebody who turns up and fixes your church roof. Guilty as charged. We are hard and fast communitarians. We care about turning up door by door and street by street, fixing what's broken, sweating the small stuff like the bins and the potholes and making sure your kid's school is a safe place to go. But we think globally as well. We care passionately about those people half a world away that we may never meet, facing climate injustice, persecution, and war. These are the challenges of our time, and Scottish Liberal Democrats have a robust plan for all of it. Thank you.
I wanted to kick things off on a cheerful note. We've got a looming £5 billion black hole in devolved spending by the end of the decade. Sir Anton Muscatelli, President of the Royal Society of Edinburgh, warned Holyrood is facing its gravest financial crisis since devolution. He urged politicians not to hide the difficult choices that will have to be made. So let's get real. What difficult choices will your party make after this election? Will it be spending cuts or tax rises? Because that is the 2 choices. Mary, and I will be brutal here. 2 minutes, please.
No problem. So the first thing to say is that Scotland's economy has outstripped the UK's in terms of both GDP and productivity since the SNP have been in government. International credit agencies Standard & Poor's and Moody's recently noted that Scotland displayed both good prudent financial management and a diversified economy. So I will give the alternative to the very negative case for Scotland's economy that others will give. But we absolutely have to get used to doing more and for our public services to work harder with less investment. So there's a number of things we need to do. We need to grow our economy, which I majored on in my introductory remarks. We need to embark on a period of public sector reform because we want excellent public services that people can rely on, but nobody's experience of public services just now across the UK is that they are awash with public money. So take our NHS, for example. We need to shift the balance of care to be more into the communities. We need to embrace digitisation. We need to embrace more efficient approaches to surgeries and the work that our NHS is doing. We need to make what we've got work harder. But you mentioned tax, and I was very open in my opening remarks that the SNP has adopted a progressive approach to taxation, which says that those who can pay a little more ought to pay a little more, and that allows us to fund universal benefits that make the quality of life in Scotland better, like sending our children to get their university degrees without being left with £35,000 to £40,000 of tuition fees. That is a major benefit to being in Scotland. So, growth in our economy, public service reform, and being clear that we have a strong foundation to start with in our economy.
Malcolm, spending cuts, tax rises, which one?
Thank you, and I think, to listen to Mary's answers, I think highlights one of the challenges that we've got going forward, because at the end of the day, the money that is spent in Scotland is Scotland's money. It comes from our taxpayers, it comes from our business, it comes from our economy, and it does need to be developed. I met someone who's 18 months out of their apprenticeship, and they were working with somebody who started the same day they did. That person lives in Berwick, and the former apprentice I was speaking to lives in North Berwick. His friend was taking home £3,000 more a year, which is allowing him to buy a house, allowing him to get married, and allowing him to have a car. The lad I was talking to is going to have to borrow money from his parents to buy his first flat. There are benefits, there are universal benefits here in Scotland, but he doesn't need the baby box yet. He would be quite happy to pay prescriptions. There are difficult choices that need to be made because we need to free up our entrepreneurs to create the wealth and the money here in Scotland and to drive it forward. But most of all, we need to spend your money far, far better. If you think of the 133 quangos that I know the Scotsman picked up in their very good article, where we have spending bodies that are so far separated from the public and so far separated from the Scottish government that when things go wrong and people want responsibility held, the Scottish government blame the quangos can't be identified, and individuals aren't responsible for the waste. This is your money. It needs to be spent far, far more efficiently. There needs to be a far more ruthless grasp on how we invest in Scotland, because our young people need it, our older people need it, our economy needs it, but most of all, our communities need a better spend out of their pound. That's why identifying the money for the potholes is such a simple way, but also, as we've heard earlier, creating better environments in our schools and the creation of apprenticeships. So the simple question is it cuts or is it more taxation? The reality is it is far better spending of the money that comes into government and taking the responsibility for that spend so you know where it is. So we don't have the ferries fiasco. We don't have all of these quangos. We don't have the wastage and the challenge that the ferries have had serving the islands. It is about taking responsibility for your money and knowing who it is that's taking that responsibility.
Malcolm.
So you're all familiar with the GERS report, which comes out every year on the finances for Scotland. It costs 117 billion to run Scotland, of which 72 billion of that is controlled by Holyrood, 60% controlled by Holyrood. It's 117 in total, and Scotland raises tax of 87. So that's a 30 billion deficit. Now that is, the economists clarify that, saying that's 12% of GDP. For Scotland to be in the EU under Maastricht Treaty rules, the maximum deficit you can have is 3% of GDP. So this is a big fat lie being promulgated by the SNP. You can jump into Europe at a minute's notice. The EU will not have Scotland on that basis. It's a massive deficit. And in order to fulfill the 3%, they would need to cut public services by 22.5 billion, and nobody is up for that. You wouldn't have seen austerity, anything like it. Now, the 117 billion that was spent today, when the Parliament started in 1999, that was 34 billion. So that means it's grown. Our spending in Scotland has grown by 5% per annum. Compound annual growth, 5% per annum. I don't know any business that grows at 5% per annum every year. So the second big lie is austerity. That hasn't been austerity. 5% growth in public spending in Scotland is not austerity. But here's the thing, our economy is not productive because we put a whole bunch of disincentives in people's way. So we now got these fancy 6 tax bands, income tax bands in Scotland. Progressive, we're told. No, regressive, I say. Because what's happening here is that ordinary, normal, middle-earning people like nurses, teachers, police officers are being dragged up into higher tax bands. And they're now managing their hours. We now know in the NHS that nurses and doctors are managing their hours because they don't want to fall over the next band up. And then they have other benefits withdrawn. They have massive marginal tax rates. So we therefore have got a work plan problem because we've got too many tax bands. It's the law of unintended consequences. So again, I say we need to cut our taxes and make people feel more productive. How do you grow the economy? The economy is not just some magic thing up in the clouds. The economy is people. It's all of you who work, who run businesses. You will grow the economy if you're incentivized. You need to be incentivized. At the moment, you're told you've got the broadest shoulders, but you're shrugging your shoulders. You're saying, why bother do an extra shift? Why should I grow my business? Why should I expand my premises? It's not rocket science. What we need to do is grow the economy by incentivizing you to be more productive. And when you do that, interestingly, you'll spend your money inside this country, you'll grow your business, you'll hire more staff, and that is the way we get out of this doom loop.
Alex?
So I'm going to start my answer by talking about health, because you've heard a lot about the structural deficit, the difference between our tax take and our public spend. The Leviathan share of our public spend is in our NHS, and a lot of that money is being spent on failure demand. And what do I mean by that? Well, on any given night, there are 2,000 Scots stuck in our nation's hospitals who have been declared well enough to go home, but are too frail to do so without either a care bed in a local care home or a care package to receive them into their own home. As such, that's costing the NHS £1.3 million a day to keep people in hospital who do not want to be there. That creates a care bottleneck, which leads to cancelled elective surgical operations. It also means that ambulances are stacking up outside A&E for hours on end, and people can't get out of A&E into the wider hospital. Not because of a deficiency of care in our hospitals, it's because of the fact that we just don't have the capacity. So we immediately need to sort that by making social care a profession of choice, massively investing in it, so we can get those Scots out of it. Second thing I'd say is this. So in terms of growing the economy, we also need to look at, first and foremost, getting those 800,000 people back to work who are currently waiting for NHS care. We need to fix our broken relationship with Europe, starting with a bespoke customs union. But we also need to make Scotland a viable place to do business again. It's really difficult to do business in Scotland. I've talked about how we need to reform planning. It takes a matter of weeks to get a massive infrastructure or capital investment project green-lighted in Denmark. It can take years on the desk of Scottish ministers to have the same thing happen here. Same thing of skills shortages or places for them to live. We need to radically reform all of that. And it's not a safe place to be because you don't know if you set up a business that the assessor isn't going to revalue your business, as we've seen in the latest rate revaluation, which saw a pub have its rate bill increased by £300,000 and good local businesses going to the wall without so much as a buy your leave or explanation as to why this is happening. The final thing I'll say is this, is about tax. Now, Liberal Democrats will never be ideological about tax. We believe, of course we do, that the people with the broadest shoulders should carry the biggest burdens. But the Laffer curve is real. There is a point at which taxation changes generate capital flight, or they disincentivize entrepreneurs or indeed surgeons from locating to Scotland. We need an evidence-led tax policy that is geared to the requirements of our economy as we seek to grow it.
Patrick?
I mean, I'm glad that the way you framed the question challenges us all to start telling the truth, because there are choices to be made. And the choice between tax policy and cuts to public services is a real one. Anyone who's standing here telling you that cutting tax is somehow going to act like magic dust on the economy and everything's just going to boom, that is nonsense. It isn't going to happen. We also need to tell the truth about what has been happening. I'm not at all surprised that a multimillionaire has stood here and tell you that we haven't had austerity in this country. The super rich have not lived with austerity. The super rich were never supposed to live with austerity. But if you see your ordinary income stagnating, if you see your rent spiraling way beyond your income, if you see your other bills going up, if you see your community facilities closing down and your kids not able to get the opportunities in life that previous generations would have expected, you're living with austerity. And since the austerity years, the super rich have got richer. And that was by design. That's not a bug in the system. That's part of how it's supposed to work. And we also need to tell the truth about what the choices that have been made. I'm proud of having pushed the SNP to go further than they were comfortable with on taxation. It took a few years of work after those tax powers were devolved before Nicola Sturgeon agreed that yes, basically something very similar to the 2016 tax proposals from the Green Manifesto is what was put into practice. And that means an extra £1.8 billion a year going into public services and in public investment in Scotland, and it's mostly coming from high earners. It is simply flatly untrue to say that people on middle incomes are now paying at the higher rate of tax. If you're on middle income, you're in the low 30s in Scotland. That's just counting people in work. If we count the whole adult working age population, it's lower than that. So we need to be telling the truth here about what the income distribution really is. Income tax, I think, can probably still be tweaked a bit, but it's not going to deliver a substantial further change in the immediate years ahead. But wealth taxation has been massively under-addressed. We could do far more with the full powers of independence, but the wealth tax that currently exists is property tax in this country, and council tax is based on decades-old valuations. It's as though we were paying income tax on what we paid in our 20s, still when we're in our 50s or 60s. It's absurd. Council tax needs to be fundamentally reformed and reflect true property values, so that those who are living in the most expensive properties, who by and large have the greatest asset wealth locked up in those properties, are paying their fair share. At the moment, they're paying a tiny pittance of their income in property tax, while people on ordinary incomes living in normal homes are paying a great big chunk of their income on council tax. And there's a great deal more that we could do if we reform that and give local authorities more power to raise the revenues that they need. But one way or another, if we don't raise the revenue, you won't get the public services that you have even today, never mind restoring and rebuilding the ones that we've lost.
And Murdo, I assume you disagree with some of that.
I do. I'll come to Patrick in a minute. I was very taken with Mary referencing the Credit Reference Agency's conclusions about the Scottish economy, because, of course, what they said was that was conditional on Scotland being part of the United Kingdom, which, of course, is the opposite of what Mary wants to do. But I think there's three answers to the original question. The first is growth in the economy, and I disagree fundamentally with Patrick. The way to get more tax revenue is not to drive wealthier people out of Scotland, which is what would happen.
Not happening.
It's going to we need to attract more wealthy people into Scotland, because we know that wealthier people pay proportionally far more tax. Let's make Scotland somewhere attractive for wealthier people to come and settle and pay their taxes and invest. And that would be a virtuous circle for Scotland instead of being a vicious circle. The second thing we need to do is tackle waste. And I think Alex referenced the ferries. You know, it's an absolute scandal. We have 2 ferries in Scotland that have now cost the best part of £500 million that are not serving island communities, when the original estimated cost was 92 million. That's just one example of an area of waste under the SNP government that could be avoided. But the third part of this, and this is probably the most difficult, is we need to accept there are difficult choices that will need to be made. And the biggest growth in government spending over the next 5 years, according to all the analysts, will be in benefits, working age benefits. And nobody we incentivize people to get back into work so they can contribute instead of being claimants of benefits. And that's the most difficult thing to tackle, but that's the only way we're going to face this challenge.
I do want to ask about education and health, so if people could keep their answers a bit shorter, but I also want to ask about the feeling that this election and politics generally is becoming increasingly toxic. I think there's a number of high-profile female MSPs who've left Holyrood at this election who've spoken about this. There's been lots of talk that this could be the most bitter and brutal election in Holyrood's history. Malcolm, I'm going to come to you first because I know there's people in this panel, there might be people in the audience who blame your party for some of that. You've obviously been in the headlines recently with a joke you told, you've had candidates that have dropped out or have come under scrutiny for comments they've made in the past. Do you think that reform has contributed to this?
Not at all. We're running a positive campaign. I haven't said a negative thing about anybody in this campaign. I've said negative things about their policies. I haven't made any personal attacks, and we're running a positive campaign. Reform UK wants this country to be happy and healthy and wealthy and cohesive. We need cohesive communities, which means we need to work hard to understand where there's discontent, why there's discontent, and we need to face up to it and not bury our heads in the sand. We will always tell the truth. Reform UK will run a truthful campaign.
Mari, what do you think about this issue?
I just think that's an astonishing failure to acknowledge the hurt and the disgust that was caused by your own comments, Malcolm. I think also what I find particularly distasteful is the fact that having said them, your explanation said, well, I made a donation. Throwing money at the problem as though that could get you away from how disgraceful and homophobic your comments were, and you really ought to have taken the opportunity tonight to apologise for that. But this is feeding into a wider climate in our politics, which is where the temperature and the volume is just ever increasing, and it doesn't serve our people. Things, mistruths run on social media, seen by thousands of people before they can be corrected. We all, politicians and journalists, have a responsibility to bring decency and kindness, and yes, robust, but always respectful debate to our politics. And I genuinely fear the tenor of the debate in the Scottish Parliament if, led by a man who can't apologise for a deeply offensive so-called joke, are returned to the Scottish Parliament, and it should be a warning to us all.
Can I come back in?
I'll come to the rest, but just Malcolm, quickly, if you want to respond to that, I'll give you the chance.
Just for the record, I made a bad joke 8 years ago, before I was in public life, before I was in politics. I made a fulsome apology at that time and made amends. It was 8 years ago. That is done and dusted.
Patrick?
Well, yeah, I mean, Mr. Offord is right to point out that it was 8 years ago. It's a hell of a lot more recent than Nigel Gas-them-all Farage's schoolboy racism. So let's acknowledge that that happens. And yes, people do make mistakes. But I think the level of revulsion that I, as a queer person who's been out in public life, felt at that, I won't even call it a joke, that remark, not only the homophobia of it, but also the racist stereotypes that it rested on. I feel nauseous even thinking about those comments. But it goes beyond that. We've also been in a period where outright racism is being normalized, completely normalized across large parts of the political spectrum in this country, to the point where prominent people in Parliament, I'm pleased to say not yet in the Scottish Parliament, but that may be coming, in the Westminster Parliament, in the media, are openly saying that black and minority ethnic people aren't or can never be British or Scottish or English. And one of Reform's candidates who had made comments like that, Mr. Offord, defended that candidate rather than sacking her. And she resigned because she felt she hadn't had her racist comments defended enough by the party. Now, the level of racism that we're seeing is not just something that's bad for our politics. I've met hospital workers and care workers who've been assaulted, who've been on the receiving end of racist abuse at work because of this rising tide of hostility and toxic politics, or anti-immigrant politics. And we see where it ends up when we look across to the US. We see what began as this kind of political discontent is now embodied in gangs of masked armed thugs, raiding people's homes and businesses and workplaces and schools and colleges, abducting people and throwing them into privatized, of course, concentration camp cages ready for deportation. And Reform say that they want to reproduce the state violence of ICE in the UK. So when I think again about Scotland 2050, if I think about the long-term vision for our country, we have to find it within ourselves to be the kind of country that defeats this violent, nasty and abusive culture war politics and put it back in the dustbin of history where it belongs.
Murdo, I don't mean this in a bad way, but you've been around for a while. Is a debate around this election different? Do you think it's more toxic than it's been in the past, or do you think this is hyped up?
I mean, I lived through the 2014 independence referendum. That was a pretty bitter and divisive time, if I'm honest. It was pretty bitter and divisive. I'm very proud of the fact that the Conservative Party elected in Kemi Badenoch a black woman of Nigerian origin. And I'm very proud that our party has been the first to have an ethnic minority prime minister and more women, in fact, the only women prime ministers have come from the Conservative Party. My problem with Malcolm isn't so much that he tells disgusting jokes. My problem is he can't add up. Because Malcolm, talking about tax cuts last week, claimed that he could cut taxes in Scotland by £2 billion a year, and that would be paid for over 10 years by £8 billion worth of growth. Now, when I was taught arithmetic in school, £2 billion over 10 years came to £20 billion, which is substantially more than 8 billion. So, Malcolm, your arithmetic doesn't add up, never mind your jokes.
Would you like me to explain it to you?
Well, you can
Very
try,
simple.
because it doesn't add up.
We collect 38% in tax of GDP growth, or annual 1% additional growth of GDP is 2.2 billion. Over 10 years is 22. 38% equals 8 billion, Murdo.
Martin, should come to you.
To go back to the original parameter of this question, I think this is a very important election, and it's absolutely on the politicians about how they respond to what we're not only getting on social media, but we're now getting in personal attacks on the doorstep. It was kind of you all to open your doors, but sometimes the response is different to that. We have situations where the police have had to get involved, and it is because that level of give is now so small that when people feel they are empowered to say things, they go ahead and do that. And the world of the social media responses is truly, truly horrific. I ensure that members of my staff don't see it because it is, if I just put politely, upsetting. But the challenge that we face is that the behavior that is being shown by adults, both on social media and in events, is now moving down to our children in schools. And you see the misogyny that female teachers and female staff members are facing from not just teenage boys, but pre-teenage boys. They are living in a world where the boundaries that we grew up with, the boundaries that, of course, young people push against, that's what growing up is about, but those boundaries didn't move, are suddenly flexing because of influences from the US, influences from other parts of the world, and they are feeling empowered to treat people as less than themselves. And I go back to the most incredible words of Joe Cox, that we do all have more in common. And if we can't learn to disagree agreeably as adults, we will reap that in the way that our young people grow up, with a lack of understanding about what the community and what social boundaries are. And we're seeing that breakdown, and that is the responsibility of all adults, because it takes a village to raise a child. But if we allow ourselves to go down the road of vehemence, of anger at the other, of being told that someone different is the cause and the responsibility of your problems, then what comes about from that is our young people being unable to learn and find out what it is to be part of a community. And that loss is tragic. And I think this election, particularly here in Scotland, is going to be a Rubicon moment for that, and it's for all of us to step up to that responsibility, call it out when it occurs, and show what proper disagreement agreeably done is about, and fight the points on tax or cuts, fight the points on police in our streets, and go back to an environment where we can have these discussions and it not become absolutely personalised, and it not be the fault of the other, because we do have more in common, every single one of us on this planet.
Alex?
Friends, Maya Angelou reminds us, when somebody shows you who they are, believe them the first time. Notwithstanding Lord Offord's terrible sense of humour, or appalling sense of humour, but even before that, when he joined the party the week after revelations emerged about Nigel Farage making gas chamber jokes in front of school children when he was at school. Even before that, we had the Hamilton and Larkhall and Stonehouse by-election, when Anas Sarwar, who is my political adversary, but my personal friend, was traduced by Reform, mischaracterising and miscasting his words to say that he would govern for the Pakistanis first and foremost. Shame on them, shame on them. And then to manifest a prospectus punching down on vulnerable, dispossessed people of any kind of minority, to talk about joining vigilante street gangs to help women feel safe at night. Sorry, but burly men walking around in dark clothes on a night, I don't think that makes women feel safe. Believe who they are the first time they show you, as Maya Angelou says. And the fun thing I say is this, and I think Martin was absolutely spot on. Our children are watching. If we cannot rise up and face this down, this is not a Scotland I recognise. It is not this Scotland I love, this internationalist of outlook, this welcoming, homecoming place of Scotland that we all call home. Will stand up to the forces of hate and darkness in our politics, and we will win.
Could I maybe just come in on that? Oh,
Very quickly.
I totally agree with what all my colleagues are saying on the panel. I just think it might be a time for us all to confirm that we wouldn't do a deal with Reform to get into government. And I can lead by saying the SNP, not in a million years, would do so.
It's easy.
Yeah.
Not
Yes.
a million years.
Agreed.
Cordon sanitaire.
I mean, I suppose I have to. Malcolm, do you want to say anything?
Well, thank you for that. That's a reasonable barrage, but that's okay. I'm getting used to it. I'm learning this game as I go along. Look, here's the thing. Reform speaks the truth to what people are saying to us on the doorstep, okay? And we've got an issue in our communities, particularly in our working class communities, we've got an issue with cohesion, which has nothing to do with race or bigotry or xenophobia. It's just to do with the sheer numbers of people arriving in the last 5 years to our shores and putting services under a lot of pressure. Now, I say to this, that we have a certain Scottish value. Sometimes we are lampooned for it, but we do one thing in our lives, which is a bit odd sometimes to the rest of the world, which is we queue up. We form a queue for services. If there's limited resources, we form a queue in an orderly way. We look after the poor and vulnerable first and make sure everyone gets a share. Right now, we've got services where there's people coming to our country who've literally just arrived, who are skipping the queue, who are jumping to the front of the queue.
Just like
And it is because the local connection rule has been broken here. And I know I've met a good number of the people coming in here, and they have come to Glasgow because they know they will get better services in terms of lodging and housing than any other part of the UK. And Glasgow has now got 6% of the asylum seekers in the UK, with 1% of the population. I'm not making any of this up. This is what is happening in that city, and the communities, the local communities, are feeling very unheard on this topic.
Glasgow is also a city
we have to move on.
in your street where people arrived in their thousands to defend their neighbours from immigration removal. That's the Glasgow I'm proud of.
I think we have to move on to allow people to ask questions. I'm very keen to open it up to the audience, but just before I do that, I need to touch on health very briefly. And I might just direct this towards you, Mary, since your party has been in government for so long. We've got waiting times dominating the agenda, targets not being met. The SNP government pledged to eradicate year-long waits by the end of this month. That's not happened. It wasn't It was a target. I think John Swinney is saying now that there's progress being made, but the promise wasn't about progress. It was about no more year-long waits. So will you now apologise on behalf of your party for missing that target?
So long waits, John Swinney said that long waits would come down in our NHS. And just this week, we've been able to confirm that long waits have come down every month for the last 9 months. More operations are now happening than have been happening since before the pandemic. 2024, recent statistics demonstrate, was a record year for hip and knee operations taking place. Under the NHS, we have more GPs being recruited and a major investment in GPs just having been made. We've more nurses, midwives, dental consultants. We are investing in our NHS substantially because we believe that it is the most precious public institution that we have, and that we will always make sure. I accept that the NHS needs to develop.
Consistently missing targets. You're setting these targets and missing them.
Well, no, I refute that because I've just pointed to 9 months.
It's a fact that the year-long target has not been met by the end of this month.
9 months. Long waits will come down. They've come down every month for the last 9 months. And that is because John Swinney does what he says he's going to do. Now, I just want to say a comment on the NHS, which is that it is one of the biggest employers in our country. It is the institution that takes the greatest investment, as has been said. It's one of the most important things in all of our lives. One thing we must absolutely make sure is that as we do what's needed to make it work in modern Scotland, we must never, ever walk away from the principle that it is free at the point of need. We will never walk away from that. And I really worry sometimes when I hear people talking about the NHS needing reform. Burn it to the ground and start again, they say. We will never say that, and we will always resist the calls, I think again, coming from the direction of Reform and Nigel Farage for privatisation and a US-style insurance-based approach. That will never happen under our watch.
Okay, I'm very conscious of the time. I want to open this up to as many questions as possible. I think there's a roving mic. So again, if you could just stick up your hand, and we'll take as many questions as we can. Yeah, I think there's a lady on my right-hand side and the coat just at the back.
Sorry, I haven't prepared a question in advance, so I might be a bit rambly. But this is for Marie, but everyone as well. Is it Mary?
It's Mary.
Yeah, Mary, sorry. But everyone else as well, and it's about housing. One of the problems with housing is that only a small portion of the housing is accessible. Now, I became ill when I was in my early 30s, and it finished my career because I was a homeowner in a second-floor flat, and I wasn't given any help because I was a homeowner. So it took me actually over a decade to get out of that flat onto a ground floor, which, again, wasn't great, but, you know, there was a few steps, and unfortunately, they're still there, and I still haven't found a solution. So access even now is difficult for me, but it completely ruined my career, it ruined my life, and it wasted a lot of years of my life when I could have been out doing my job. Because I was a teacher, I was at the top of the scale, I was in a promoted position when I got ill, and that all fell apart. So I'm thinking about young people in housing, but also actually there are older people who can't get out of hospital, someone mentioned that. A lot of it's because they can't get in and out their own home. Now, is there any reason why legislation can't be put in place where every single new build home, whether it's in a flat or a kind of single home, can't be made so that it has a kitchen, a bathroom, and an independent room on the ground floor with a ramped access, so that every single person can access that home if they want to go and visit a friend, or if they're an older person who wants to go and do some babysitting for their working daughter or daughter-in-law, or if they're an older person who's had a fall and just is waiting for knee replacement or some sort of surgery, or a younger person who's some sort of accident or temporary, hopefully, illness. Yep. So is there any reason why that can't actually be put into a legislative kind of framework so that architects designing new homes can actually have that in their mind before they start, because the problem is that it's all needing to be put in at the planning stage rather than bolt-on. It's very expensive, and a bolt-on is never going to be a good solution.
Yeah, thank you. What was your name, sorry?
Kirstine.
Kirstine, thank you for your question. I'll answer it as fulsomely as I can. Firstly, I want to say I'm sorry that to hear about your experience. It's those kind of experiences that we need to make sure nobody goes through. And your question was directly, can we legislate to make sure that homes that are built in Scotland, that are affordable homes, can be made to be accessible? And the answer is absolutely yes. And we actually just passed a Housing Act in the closing year of the Parliament, which I led for the government. And one of the commitments that I made in that was exactly as you've put it, that I want to know that when homes are built in Scotland, they are right for people's needs now and they are adaptable in the future. So there's something called the Standard for Housing for Varying Needs, and it's essentially about that. What do we need at the start, and how do we make sure that the homes we build are adaptable? And I committed as part of passing that law that we would undertake a review of that work and make sure that a new standard was in place that was fit for modern purposes within, I think it was 2 years that we said. And actually, just to demonstrate that we can work together, I worked really closely with some members of the Labour Party on that, Pam Duncan-Glancy as she was then. So that's happening. And I would also just say that it's part of a lot of work we've been doing in housing. We have just, when I was Housing Secretary, secured the single largest ever budget to go towards affordable homes if we're re-elected next year, nearly £1 billion for affordable homes. And we've also made that for the first time part of 4 years of funding to give certainty to our house builders. So if re-elected, we will be embarking on a 4-year period of major affordable homes delivery, which will include the update for Housing for Varying Needs, exactly for your circumstances.
Can I come in there?
Yep.
Yeah, Kirstine, thank you for the question. You wanting to come back?
I can't hear.
Can we give her the mic? So I've taken over. This is great.
Sorry, I wasn't
Sign of
talking
things to come.
I think this is a problem of ball being kicked down the field.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah,
not talking about
exactly,
adaptable. I'm talking about it being actually made
In legislation.
already.
Yep. So sorry,
suitable.
if I can just clarify, there's 2 points. There's the Housing for Varying Need, which is the standard that it's built to in the first instance, and that's got to be right for people with additional needs and space, and that's what I'm reviewing to be updated. There's also the question of adaptations, which I've said many times as an MSP, is probably one of the biggest caseload that I have with councils working to have later adaptations done. So they're 2 separate things, but I can assure you we're sorting out the accessibility for new builds.
Alistair, thanks for coming back to me. Kirstine, it's an excellent question. The people I meet coming to my casework surgery every Friday and every Monday are queuing for ages on Edindex, which is, for those of you who don't know, the portal they need to get housing. They celebrate, and understandably, when they're given gold priority status, only to discover that gold priority status, which is afforded to people with mobility issues, only allows you to bid for ground floor flats and houses with adequate adaptations. And they're like hen's teeth. They end up waiting far, far longer. I almost get to the point where I dissuade somebody from looking for gold priority status. So we need to reform planning. I've said that 3 times tonight, and planning is about making sure we're building homes for the future. We're getting an older population. We are, as a demographic, aging and living with comorbidities. It's absolutely key that we do it. But we also need to create policy that makes sense to attract the supply of housing, which is the fundamental answer to this question. Policy by the SNP and Green government brought in after the pandemic starved off £3.4 billion worth of shovel-ready build-to-rent investment. We were just not seen as a safe place to invest, and that big money is portable. You don't, if you're a hedge fund or a pension fund, you don't need to build a housing estate in Glasgow. You can go to Manchester very easily. So we need to attract that inward investment. We also need the public sector to build homes, but it's not going to build the kind of quantum of homes that we're going to need.
Okay, I'll open up to questions again. I would say if you've got someone you want to answer the question, please say that. And if someone wants to come in, I'm happy for that. 2 or 3 questions at a time. Yeah, that's perfect. Yep. Yeah. The gentleman just there in the I think it's a blue shirt, just there.
Hi, thank you. My question is about the drug deaths epidemic taking place in Scotland. So what is your party's solution to the problem, and why are we the drug death capital of Europe? Because just to point out, Murdo's the only person that's mentioned it so far.
We'll take another couple of questions, just as Patrick suggested. Yep, the gentleman right in the end.
Thank you very much. I'm Mark Turnbull from Freedom Alliance, probably Scotland's lowest profile candidate in the coming election. I've also been in every single election going since lockdown, and we were lucky enough to be in the list last time, 21. We got 766 votes to reform 600. I don't, of course, get on the counter. Who told you life is fair? I'm in Paisley this time, and I've discovered a Mr. McLeish, who was for the Conservatives last time, but is now with Reform, and he had 2,000 votes that I would love to have. I just don't believe in changing parties personally.
Is there a question?
Yes, well yeah, I'm 6 years older than Malcolm. How do you like my hair? Say, play it straight and don't soil your soul.
Oh, right. Yes, the lady just second row.
Okay.
Hi, I've been very interested in hearing your ideas about the economy and about the NHS. But in the back of my mind is a concern that if you don't recognise women as adult human females, we will always be on a back foot to all of these benefits that you say that you can bring to Scotland. It's been almost a year since the Supreme Court ruling said that women and man and sex were a biological, and yet we've watched a Labour government in the UK and the SNP government in Scotland not implement that in their public services. What would you do, please?
So that's drug deaths and single-sex spaces. Anyone wants to come in?
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. So first of all, thanks very much for the question about drug deaths. As you might know, my colleague Douglas Ross took forward a bill to Parliament on a right to rehab. And in our view, that's absolutely crucial because there are far too many people who have drug issues who want to access rehabilitation and they simply cannot get it. And to me, that is the best route out of this problem. Instead of having people part on methadone as they can be for 10, 20 or 30 years, is about giving them access to the rehabilitation services that they need to help solve that problem. And that would be our answer, is rehab. And it's a disappointment to us that the Scottish Government and other parties on this panel voted against that when it came forward, because it was something backed by people working with the drug community across Scotland. On the lady's question here, I'm very proud that the Conservatives stood up against the Gender Recognition Reform Bill, and we are very clear that the Supreme Court judgment is absolutely clear-cut and is the settled law and needs to be applied right across Scotland. And single-sex spaces for women should be protected. But, you know, there's a new fight coming because in the very last session of Parliament just last week, John Swinney stood up and committed the SNP to an inclusive ban on conversion therapy. Now, if people are subject to torture or coercion, clearly that needs to stop. But the real worry is that this ban could end up seeing the parents of gender-confused children who don't then immediately encourage them down the route of transition being treated as criminals. And that is deeply harmful and unacceptable. And I'm very clear, as Conservatives, we will oppose that because it is the wrong move to make. We should be defending the rights of parents and defending the rights of women and girls to their own spaces.
I'll come to everyone in these questions. Patrick, I saw you shaking your head.
First of all, the reason why not just many political parties, but many of the witnesses on Douglas Ross's bill...
Many SNP funded by the taxpayer organisations came out against it.
May I answer? I'm very pleased that the Scottish Government funds organisations like that. That's part of why I believe in public services being well funded. But part of the reason why many political parties and many of the expert witnesses didn't agree with Douglas Ross's bill was the overemphasis that it placed on rehabilitation at the expense of other successful forms of treatment, including harm reduction. And I think for me personally as a Green, we need to fundamentally start a discussion on drugs by recognising that this is a deeply dangerous industry which has been left in the hands of gangsters. And those countries which have taken a different approach and regulated the supply and provision have found it much more beneficial in terms of giving people routes out of addiction, supporting people to get their lives back together again. You know, I used to work in sexual health in the voluntary sector, and one of the things that was true then as it is now was that if you could find one intervention you could make that would make somebody who is an intravenous drug user more likely to become HIV positive or Hep C positive, more likely to commit future offences, less likely to ever get their lives together, it was prison. Prison is deeply harmful as an intervention to people in the grip of addiction, and that's fundamentally a step that we should stop. In relation to the other question, look, let's acknowledge we're not likely to agree on this, and respectfully, we can have that disagreement. My background as an LGBT person, somebody who's been part of that community for many decades, is what I see in the stigmatization and demonization of transgender people at the moment is very similar to the homophobia of the 1980s and 90s. Transgender people are not a threat to anybody else's life or their ability to have a good life. Well, I've been invited to give an answer. If you don't want me to give an answer, I'll shut up. But you know, if yeah, and I believe, and in fact the women's network of my party believes very strongly in an inclusive intersectional understanding of feminism and of misogyny, and that includes transgender women as well. And I think that much of the opinion polling in Scotland and the UK shows not only that that's a majority position, but actually that women in the population as a whole are more trans-inclusive than the rest of the population on average. I'm very pleased about that, and I think it's another aspect of the culture war politics that I was talking about earlier, which we need to be able to have the courage to confront.
Mary.
Thank you. Just taking the gentleman's question first on drug deaths, my view, and this has been reinforced by my work as Housing Secretary and working with homeless individuals, is that the root cause of the drug death problem is both poverty and with a combination of increasingly toxic mix of street drugs. And therefore, there are a number of interventions that the government is making to address the problem head-on, including support for rehabilitation. As Murdo said, we absolutely support rehabilitation. The formulation of it with Douglas Ross's bill wasn't right. We have invested in the Thistle as a novel approach in drug consumption rooms, as a public health approach to try and support people. We are rolling out naloxone to stop people from overdosing to their death. But the root cause of poverty has to be addressed as well. And John Swinney has made his ministers, our collective mission of this Parliament has been work to eradicate child poverty in Scotland. And it is working, because child poverty in this country is coming down, whilst very regretfully it is going up elsewhere in the UK, and policies that we've brought in, including the Scottish Child Payment, have helped to drive that. And that brings us back, doesn't it, to some of the conversations we were having at the start about economy, when I made the point that you must sit a strong economy alongside a fair society, because investing now to take our children out of poverty is not only the right thing for them, it not only tackles drug deaths down the line, but it means more healthy and well-educated people contributing to our economy and avoiding spend in justice and health interventions later in life. So it is absolutely about our people. On the question of the Supreme Court ruling, sorry, I was just trying to find you there. The Scottish Government absolutely accepts the Supreme Court ruling. We accept its... No, if I can just finish the question. We accept the ruling. We have a responsibility to balance the human rights of everybody in Scotland. Absolutely of women, but also of trans people. Trans people exist. And I think if we take our guidance from the Supreme Court ruling, whilst it was absolutely clear and we accept it, it also said that we ought not to see this as a victory of someone's rights over another. And as a responsible government who believes in human rights, we will implement the judgment. It's being implemented now. There are a series of public documents that I could point to. there's a series of public documents I could point to where we've updated our guidance. We'll continue to do that, but we will always balance the human rights of everybody in our country, as we do across a number of other things. Think about people's right to protest versus people's right to be protected from certain things that they would find offensive. Human rights are availed to us on account of being human, and governments have to balance them for everybody.
Malcolm.
So I was a member of the Scotland office in the previous government with Anas Sarwar when he was Secretary of State, and it was he and I that took the decision to block the Gender Recognition Act from Holyrood.
Shame.
And here's the thing, that over 25 years of devolution, there's been something like 246 bills passed by the Scottish Parliament, all of which have been given royal assent by Westminster, because that's the way the system works. But there is a veto, it's called Section 35, and we pushed that veto. The first time only it's been used in 25 years, we pushed it because we didn't feel that bill gave security and safety to women and girls. Simple as that. And then we went to the Supreme Court and we won in the Supreme Court. So I'm very clear on this issue that we will absolutely back the Supreme Court, absolutely secure spaces, safe spaces for women and girls. We need to do that, and we should respect the law as quickly as possible.
Martin?
About to the drug deaths, that really should be one of the most horrendous signs about where Scotland has got to, that we are the drug deaths capital, effectively, of Western Europe. And the causes, as others have indicated, are in many ways complex. But what we're actually doing to those individuals and the support they're getting when they find themselves addicted to drugs is like something out of the 1980s. The loss of the rehabilitation beds, the loss of the skilled support that was there means that, you know, friends, family, colleagues, strangers are being put through the most horrendous time, and they feel that the community has left them behind. So it is about properly supporting them. It's not a crime. That is not the answer, locking up. It is about the skilled professional support that we have, both from a medical point of view, from the psychiatric and psychological point of view, but also from the community support, so that we don't walk past, that we are there to support. So it is absolutely about addressing it, because when you see the drug deaths figures, they're just figures so often. But for every one of those individuals, they had friends and family. And to think that Scotland doesn't care and doesn't invest and doesn't support and doesn't help is a real indictment of where we are as a community. And so it is about doing the proper and adequate care. To the Supreme Court decision, I mean, it rests on the fact that when you look across not just Scotland, but most of the world, it is women who are doing the caring, both of babies and children, but also at the other end of the demographic. It's women that we're expecting to go back to work as soon as possible. It is women that are picking up all of the challenges that sit within households, and the Supreme Court has made its decision, and I think it's a very categoric decision. And to the final question, which sadly hasn't been answered, I think your haircut's fine, don't worry.
Alex?
So on the drug deaths emergency, and it is an emergency, since 2017, 1,500 Scottish babies have been born addicted to drugs, fetal abstinence syndrome. It's why Liberal Democrats extracted millions of pounds worth of funding from the Scottish Government in the last two budgets to fund services to help them get clear from the agony of those early days. More than 1,200 people are dying in Scotland every year because of drug overdoses. If you live in Glasgow, you have 10 times more likelihood of a drug overdose than somebody living in London. This is a particularly Scottish problem, and we need a Scottish solution to it. Now, this started when the SNP withdrew quarter of the funding to ADPs, alcohol and drug partnerships, back in 2015. We are still counting the cost of that short-sighted decision. That's why Liberal Democrats absolutely support the rollout of safe consumption rooms. I visited the Thistle Centre in Glasgow. That has saved 60 lives in the last last year, 60 lives. Those are 60 people walking around who wouldn't have been had that safe consumption room not been open. We need them in every community in Scotland, and it's not just in our urban populations. Rural drug use is a real problem also. Coming on to the Supreme Court ruling, of course, the Liberal Democrats accept the judgment, and there are other court cases underway to find out what that implies in terms of its application in our society. But I hope it doesn't end up in a place where people don't feel comfortable using the toilet. Right now, the biggest threat to women in our society is not trans people, it is predatory men. Trans people...
Family.
Trans people are real, and they deserve human rights, and women are real, and they deserve human rights. These two propositions are not incompatible.
Okay, I know this is an issue that people feel passionately about. We need to move on. I can probably take two more questions. Yep, the young man at the front here.
Thank you so much, Ryan Quinn. A question to really all the panel, but I'm going to start with you, Malcolm, is that I've seen that you were on the television the other day and you were asked what gay people had said to you after the supposed joke that you told came out. Now, you said that they said, "Go, Malcolm, go." I'm gay. I'm not saying "Go, Malcolm, go." I'm saying apologise, because you refused to apologise earlier on this evening. I'm sure there are tens, if not hundreds, of other gay people sat in this room just now who are horrified at what you said, as I'm sure everyone is horrified at what you said. So, on behalf of all of them, I would appreciate an apology. And to the rest of the panel, if we have seen the vile rhetoric come out of some of the Reform UK candidates, 5 of them have now gone, how do we cope with that if that is brought into the Holyrood chamber?
One more question. Yep, sorry, the gentleman just in the middle row here. Sorry, just at the second row, middle. Sorry.
I'd like to see the panel discuss North Sea oil and gas and how their parties will ensure Scottish energy security and energy sovereignty. I think it's a shame that hasn't really come up yet. When we look at the kind of nonsense that we're seeing in Iran right now, and the kind of havoc that that's wreaking on household energy prices, surely it is time to kind of put away the ideology of it all and back all viable Scottish energy projects, including oil and gas.
Malcolm, I'll come to you first since the question was directed at you.
Okay, so I gave a fulsome apology 8 years ago. As I said, I was not in public life, and I have a lot of gay friends, and they know that I'm not homophobic.
Some of my best friends.
And they know, so therefore my apology was made then.
What about tonight?
It was made fulsomely there, and they know that I'm not homophobic, so therefore that is why they have given me
if you
a
were
great
sorry
deal of
then,
support.
surely you're sorry now.
Moving on. The apology was made, amends were made.
So you should be able to make it again.
Okay.
Moving on to the more material question about oil and gas.
You're not really sorry then, are you?
Moving on to oil and gas.
Nasty little...
Let Malcolm respond.
Bit of age prejudice thrown in with it.
Our energy prices are 7 times more expensive than China and 4 times more expensive than the USA, which means we cannot grow our economy. We are importing 70% of our gas from Norwegian gas fields over the fence from the ones that we are shutting down. Even the Norwegian energy minister thinks that is daft. The country is covered in wind turbines, not a single blade is made in Scotland. It's time to get real on this. It's time that we understand that our energy system is 75% hydrocarbon and only 25% non-hydrocarbon. We have North Sea gas outside our shore. We can license it for UK domestic production only. It doesn't need to go on the international gas market. And then we can have a balanced system where every part of the energy system fits together, most importantly, to give us cheap energy. When you look at your energy bill, which for an average 3-bed house is £1,000 a year, only 1/3 of it is the price of your energy. 2/3 are all the tariffs, the carbon taxes, the subsidies. Subsidies for wind farms now going for 50 years. At what point, if we were told this was the cheapest form of energy, Why does it still need a subsidy? I agree with the young man. The last thing to say is we have a world-class industry that we're destroying. And we need to get it back. I'll be in Aberdeen next Wednesday on this particular point. We need to reinvigorate and revitalise our North Sea gas.
Martin.
I think when you make a mistake and when you apologise, it doesn't actually matter when you did that, because if your apology is genuine, you will hold that apology for the rest of your life. So if you're asked by an injured party, you can repeat it. If you're asked by others about an event, you can repeat the apology, because I think that's what being human is really about. How is the next chamber going to deal with it? You've just tacked into my most nerdy love of standing orders. The chamber has a requirement of courtesy and respect. I would like to think that I can understand what courtesy and respect means. And that means if you drift beyond what is courteous to each and every member who is in that chamber and the people they represent, if you fail to be respectful towards each of those members in the chamber, irrespective of the characteristics and human rights they bring into that chamber and everyone they represent, I would hope that the presiding officer, with the power that is given to them by everyone else into that chamber, calls it out, stops it, demands an apology if necessary, and if the scenario is such that it cannot be done, then that member's invited to leave, because they are sent there by constituents who elect them. They represent those communities, and if they cannot reflect the best of those communities, they should not be able to participate for a period of time. With regard to the energy security, I think that's crucially important, and it also allows me to do my other nerdy bit, which is about Torness Nuclear Power Station, which if in 2030 we had a change in the use of planning laws to prevent nuclear power, we could have small modular reactors put in there that would continue to produce electricity. If there were 2 of them, it would produce slightly less than Torness does at the moment, which would give us a very secure, very safe, net zero energy production that would allow us to do the transition away from fossil fuels into a better and more sensible future. If it was to be allowed for 3, we would produce more electricity than the whole central belt needs. And that way we can guarantee incredibly well-paid jobs, we can guarantee energy security, and we can see our bills come down, and we can see it come down in the very near future and not a mythical point in decades to come. So thank you for the question.
Alex.
So on the subject of conduct in the chamber, I think it is incumbent on all of us who are privileged enough to be elected to the Scottish Parliament to reach for the better natures of the people that send us there and reflect the better natures of our constituents. I don't see that in some of the behaviours that we've seen from reform. On oil and gas, I think the nonsense, as you describe it very eloquently, that's going on in the Middle East right now is, I think, a clarion call that we do need to transit away from our dependency on oil and gas. But the reality is we are still dependent on it. And for as long as we're dependent on it, because successive governments have failed to drive down our demand in it, we need to look to how we manage that energy gap and that energy security. Now, the transition away from oil and gas is a reality baked into the geology of the North Sea. It's going to happen. And whether we extract more barrels from it or less, it really depends on whether it makes more environmental sense to extract our North Sea oil than it does to import that oil from rather sketchier regimes, and in some cases it certainly will do. But just on Martin's last point about nuclear power, and this is an interesting one. I am a Maynard Keynes fan, and Maynard Keynes said, when the facts change, I change my mind. What do you do? And I've been on something of a journey in nuclear power. When I first got involved in politics, we just had Fukushima and things like that, and I was vehemently opposed to it. But now as the technology has improved, as the waste management has improved, as we've developed the industrialization of small modular nuclear reactors, I think they will be part of our energy mix, and we can't turn our back on it. But the thing is that we have to bring everybody with us. We can't ignore the end-of-level boss that is climate change for this century. That is a reality we just can't turn away from. The sooner we get to net zero, the better. But we need to make sure that nobody's left behind, that people who are employed in good skilled jobs are helped to transit those skills into the renewable and nuclear technologies of the future, and we bring everybody with us.
Mary.
Thank you. Just Ryan, on your first question, I mean, I think if Malcolm were truly apologetic 8 years ago, he'd be able to say it tonight. And I think it really demonstrates that you are unfit for election, Mr. Offord. And, you know, that perhaps is telling, given that you have never been elected. And I understand it was donations which eventually got you your position in the Lords, which I would like to see abolished, incidentally. But how do we take on reform? We take them on how utterly hollow their arguments are, how they have absolutely no vision for our country and absolutely no experience to deliver any of it. The only thing, reform, if you cut through the racist rhetoric and the other unpleasant comments that they make, the only thing they've actually ever been responsible for helping to deliver was Brexit. And just last week, 2 weeks ago, the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, made clear in a speech that it's now up to 8% of our GDP that's been wiped because of Brexit. So I think that we take them on the fact that they are a bunch of incredibly wealthy people backed by even wealthier folk trying to sow fear and division in our communities, and that will only ever lead to disruption and destruction, especially for those folk who they're trying to scare into voting for them. So we'll take them on in that way. On oil and gas, I mean, here's an absurdity. We don't decide. So it's Scotland's oil, it's Scotland's gas, it's Scotland's energy, and yet none of us here on this panel decide what's happening with it. We have sent about £350 billion from Scotland's North Sea to UK Treasury since oil was discovered some decades ago. And just 2 weeks ago, when the ramifications of Iran were emerging, we wrote to the Prime Minister and we said, we've got a whole series of houses who are off gas grid, they're reliant on oil, we need support. £350 billion has flowed to the Treasury. Do you know how much Keir Starmer sent back per household on oil? £33. And someone mentioned Norway. Do you know how much Norway's oil fund is worth per citizen? £300,000. So they have utterly squandered our oil wealth, and our responsibility is to make sure that they don't do that again with our renewables, and we need independence to make Scotland's energy work for our people. And just on the question of licensing,
just very quickly,
the SNP's view is that it has to be tested against our legal obligations for climate compatibility and energy security.
Patrick.
First of all, Ryan, I'm sorry you were treated with such contempt when you asked your question. I think the tone speaks for itself, and I'm afraid it is, you're right, what we're going to have to expect if the far right do form a bloc in the Scottish Parliament. We've already seen some pretty bad behaviour in the Scottish Parliament in the last session and the one before that. And I think that I think there's been a growing acknowledgement across MSPs from a number of different parties that presiding officers need to have the willingness to take action when that happens. Just very recently, we saw one member thrown out of the chamber for misbehaviour. And I think, well, I will certainly be asking the candidates for the new presiding officer, if I'm lucky enough to be re-elected, I'll be asking what approach they intend to take to robustly enforcing those principles that were spoken about earlier about respect and courtesy in the chamber. In relation to the other question, nuclear, Martin, takes many, many years to build, as well as being extremely expensive to build. It is not a short-term fix to the current energy crisis. And even approving new oil and gas licenses, they take years to deliver anything. If the UK government changed its position now and started approving new licenses, it would deliver nothing for energy security at all for many years, even if it ultimately did, and that's questionable. And even if it wasn't for that delay, it would do nothing for energy prices at all. Pretty much everybody who studies the energy system in any detail openly acknowledges that the prices are set on the global market. The price that you pay for your energy would not be affected at all if UK production increased a bit or decreased a bit. That's not how the price is set. The climate does not have an ideology. The climate has no ideology. And the thing that we have to grapple with is that unless there is some magic mechanism available that says for every extra barrel equivalent we extract in Scotland, we're going to make sure that some other country locks away a barrel equivalent of fossil fuels, Unless there's some magic mechanism that does that, then every extra barrel of extraction is extra CO2 going into the atmosphere at the end of the day. And the world already has many times more existing oil and gas in existing approved reserves, many more times the amount than we can afford to burn if we are remotely serious about handing on a livable planet. So this is a hard reality that we have to grapple with. And if we want to do that, grapple with that in a way that cuts people's bills and meets people's needs in the here and now, the quickest, the most efficient and the cheapest way of doing it is to cut demand. And I'm really sorry to say that Scotland has been slowing down on both how we heat our buildings and on transport. We need to decarbonise these, and they can be done fast and fair. But we need to have the political will to do that, and I'm sorry to say that that work has slowed down. So if the Greens are a force in the new Scottish Parliament, restoring that urgency to decarbonising our heat and our transport so that people don't need as much of the price volatile fossil fuel, that's something that's really important to do for people's cost of living in the short term, but it's also critically important for planetary security and national security.
And Murdo.
Ryan, going back to your question, you asked how is Holyrood going to cope with reform MSPs? Well, given the rate at which reform is losing candidates, we might be spared that through a process of natural attrition. I think my issue is, amongst many issues with reform, is I just don't think they're a serious party. And we've had unserious parties before. And I think Patrick might be the only person on the panel who remembers the Scottish Socialist Party in the second session of Parliament, Tommy Sheridan's.
They still have a street stall.
I'm sure they're still very popular on their street stall, but they were a party who came in wanting to shake everything up. They got involved in all sorts of stunts, disruption, and misbehaviour. And where are they now? They've disappeared because the public said, we don't like this. So hopefully that is a pattern that reform will follow if they get unserious, and the public will not forgive them. On North Sea oil and gas, everybody knows we will need North Sea oil and gas as a transition fuel for decades to come. That's the reality. Even the head of Renewables UK, the trade body for the renewable industry, came out last week and said we should be maximising oil and gas extraction from the North Sea. So the issue is not whether we need oil and gas. The issue is, do we import it or do we produce it ourselves? And to me, that's a no-brainer. Because if we import it, we are at the mercy of what happens in the world. And as we've seen just over the last few weeks, that means our supplies could be disrupted. If we have a resource here, we should be making the most of it ourselves. We then get the economic benefit from that. We get the jobs and we get the tax revenues. And that means we're not relying upon imports from elsewhere. And the people stopping that happening right now are Ed Miliband in the Labour government in London. And I have to say to Mary, the SNP are on the fence on this. They're not wholehearted in their support for the oil and gas industry in Scotland now, and they should be. They should be wholehearted in supporting it. And just on nuclear power, I agree with Martin on this. I would like to see all technologies being used to meet our energy future. Nuclear is a low-carbon technology. It is good for the climate to invest in nuclear. Which country in Europe has the cheapest electricity prices? France. Where does France get its electricity from? Nuclear power. QED. We should be investing in nuclear and, yes, investing in oil and gas.
Okay, I think that's probably all we've got time for. I do want to give the candidates a chance to have a last word, but if we can keep it to 30 seconds, and it has to be 30 seconds. Mary.
Oh, no challenge. Thank you all so much. What a night. It's been brilliant questions. Look, I'll just leave you with this. I've been so privileged to be part of this discussion tonight. I'm 33 years old. I'm the only woman on the panel, and I'm proud of that. But my adult life has been characterised by the financial crash, into austerity, into COVID, into wars in the continent of Europe, and a cost of living crisis. I want better for the people of this country, for the young people of this country, and for our children still to come than what the Westminster parties have been able to deliver for us, who have overseen most of that in the UK. In that time, the SNP has tried to protect you from that, and we're offering the fresh start of independence to get out of it. and keeping reform out of power in Scotland.
Malcolm, I know a lot of the focus tonight has been on you from the other candidates.
So Reform UK and Scotland's got momentum. We're now at 20% of the votes, having gone from 0.2 to 20% in 2 years, which is extraordinary. And in the 73 seats, we're in second place in 54. Here's the thing. We can all have opinions about the politicians and what they say, but the people will decide, and the people will choose on the 7th of May.
Patrick.
There is a bright, optimistic and a positive future available for Scotland. It is a Scotland that invests in itself, in its communities, that achieves a greater sense of equality and redistribution and fairness of the wealth that we all of us create together. But it has to be. It absolutely has to be a Scotland of sustainability, because that is the only future that human beings around the planet can have. And our interdependence on one another around the planet is something that hasn't come up today. I want to close by saying that our relationship with others around the planet is a critical part of who we are as a country. And I'm proud that Scotland is a country that still wants to commit to things like international development, that still wants to recognise our role in causing the climate emergency and hoping to help others to find a way out of it by working together.
Martin?
Thank you, and thank you for all attending tonight. I think the question that really needs to be asked at this election is, do you feel better than you did 19 years ago? And if the answer to that is no, then this is the opportunity for change. It's the opportunity to stop kicking the answers down the road, putting them into the long grass, but addressing the challenges that Scotland has today from its young people, from its workforce and families, from our older demographic. And if you want change, then Scottish Labour is where to go at this election.
Murdo.
The SNP have been in power for 19 years. Mary's right, we need a fresh start. We can't have a fresh start by voting for the same people who've been running the country for the last 2 decades. We need to do something different, and we need to focus on growth, because growth in the economy gives us the secure, well-paid jobs we all want to see, and it gives us the tax revenues to fund the public services we depend upon. So if you want to support a sensible centre-right party, the Scottish Conservatives are your choice. If you want to stand up for improvements in education, for an NHS that works for you, and if you want to defend women's spaces, the Scottish Conservatives are the party for you.
And finally, Alex.
Well, thank you all for the opportunity tonight, and particularly thanks to Barry, who's put an absolute shift in pulling us together. Look, I'm optimistic about the future. I think Scotland's got so much going for it, like I said at the start. I'm not worried, because fundamentally, I always believe you've got to trust the people, and the people will see through the grift and the down-punching and the false flags of reform, and they will reject them. Yeah, we'll have reform MSPs in the Scottish Parliament, but most of the Scottish Parliament will be built around the centre ground, which is where the Liberal Democrats have always been. And we are back. We had our best election for 100 years across these islands just 2 years ago. We were the standout performers in council by-elections last year. Yet we're going to win in 10 constituencies across the country. But wherever you are, for the first time in a long time, you can use that beach vote to back a Liberal Democrat, and with it, that vision for change, with fairness at its heart. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much to all 6 representatives of the political parties. Thank you very much for coming as well. I know some people might be frustrated they didn't get to ask a question. These events are always frustrating, but we have gone well over time. But thank you very much for coming tonight. Thanks very much.